Hi everyone, welcome to the demo of Realtimate. My name is Pawan and I am the co-founder of Realtimate along with Bala Bhatt. Firstly, I want to thank you all for taking your time to view this video. Secondly, before I start the demo, I want to briefly talk about what Realtimate is. In a nutshell, Realtimate is a consent-based technology platform that makes closing of a real estate transaction simple, safe, and fair for all stakeholders by using technologies like digital contracts, online escrow services, and Aadhaar based signature. There are basically three stages in the whole transaction. The first stage is the offer stage. The second stage is the agreement for sale and escrow stage. And the third stage is the release of contingencies, registration of the property, and finally the disbursement of escrow funds. So let's dive into the offer stage. So I'm going to be logging in as Shubham, and he's going to be playing the role of a broker or an agent. Okay. So as soon as he logs in, you can see this dashboard, and you can make a new offer either by clicking here or here. So let's select the property type and how the property is going to be used and the role, which is the buyer's agent in this case. And then you can input property details, the address, the identification, as well as the nearby properties. So I'm going to take some time to fill up the property address and details here. All right, now that the address has been provided and all the details have been provided, let's move on to the buyer. And the buyer, we can invite the buyer, and since this buyer is already registered in the system, so we can find him. If not, a simple invite will be sent to the buyer's email, and the buyer or any stakeholder can simply onboard onto our platform within minutes. So let's find the seller. Seller is a person named Mohit, and he's also in the system, so we can find him. And you can see that Shubham is playing the role of the buyer agent and is already been added to the transaction or the offer. So now input the most important part of the offer, which is the consideration price. Let's say it's 1 crore. And we think that 30 days is more than enough for closing, but you can select any number and you can also make edits. Now here's where we can add, the agent can add buyer contingencies. And in most cases, we think legal clearance and loan approval are the most common contingencies. And we think that 21 days are more than enough, but they can always change it by mutual consent between the buyer and seller. So I'm just going to leave it at that, select both of these contingencies. So these contingencies will be added to the agreement when the agreement is created. So with that, we'll move on and we come to the payment schedule phase, where this is where typically when sale is made, the seller expects a payment to be made as soon as the agreement of sale is done or a few days before the registration and the remaining at the time of registration. So we're doing exactly the same thing. So in this case, let's assume that 20% is required after the agreement of sale is signed. So deposit 20 lakhs into the escrow within 3 days of signing the agreement. Now, for simplicity, I'm just going to say the remaining can be given at the time of registration and in a manner that can be decided later. So that meets the criteria of the payment. And here's where the value of the stamp paper to be purchased is specified. Um, we don't want to burn a lot of money since this is a real production demo. So I'm going to peg it at 20 rupees. We don't want to give away free money to the government. And here's where the buyer agent can specify his commission, right? So I'm going to say 1%. And the number of days the offer is valid is 3 days. So we accept the privacy policy, review it one last time, and send. So as soon as he sends it, it's gone to the buyer. So this you can see it's waiting for the buyer to accept. So I am the buyer, Pawan is the buyer. So when I go to my email and see, I have got a alert which says, hey, there's an offer to view, and Shubham has sent the offer. So I can click the offer here, or I can just log into Realtimate. So now I'm going to act as the buyer and log into Realtimate and see what the offer is all about. So as soon as I log in, my gaze is pointing towards this blinking icon here, right? Which shows that there is a new offer, and I can click here, or I can go to my offers in progress and I can also see it there. Okay, so waiting for the buyer to accept. I'm the buyer. I'm going to look at the offer, and I trust my agent, and I see that he's filled in all the information just exactly like what was discussed and what was needed. And if I wanted to add my wife here for example, I can make an invite and add her, but I'm going to leave it as is for simplicity's sake. So I like the contingencies, everything looks good, and all I'm going to do is simply accept. As soon as I accept the offer is now sent to the seller to review and accept. I'm going to sign out and I'm going to log in as the seller. If you remember, was one Mr. Mohit, and I'm going to log in as Mohit here. And as soon as I log in, I can see that there's an offer waiting for me, and I'm the seller. I can do the exact same thing that the buyer did of reviewing the offer, and I'm just going to pretend that everything is good here. And if I wanted to add another person like the seller's wife, he could easily add the person and accept the offer. All right, so now everyone has accepted the offer, and this ends the offer process, and I will move on to stage two, which will be the agreement for sale and the escrow stage. The second stage is a very exciting stage of the whole process. You'll notice how the magic unfolds here, really. In the previous stage, you noticed how we digitized the offer process in the real estate transaction. Now you'll witness automation and efficiency of the highest level. The offer stage ended and led to the creation of a transaction, which I'll show you very quickly. The first output of the transaction is an automated agreement. Now let's take a look, okay? We're not done. There's a lot more to be shown. So now I'm going to be logging in as Pavan, who was the buyer. So as soon as I log in and I go to the transactions page, you can see the offer which was made for 101 Vittal Malya Road has translated itself into a transaction. And when you click on it, the first thing you'll notice is there's a call out for a payment to be made. And before we get there, let me show you what has happened to the offer, right? So when I download this and I open it, you can see that our platform has created a document, a digital contract, which has three components: the agreement for sale, the escrow agreement, and the buyer's agency agreement, since buyer was also supposed to get a commission. And we took all the offer variables and populated the agreement with the offer variables. So things like 30 days was required for closing. What was the stamp paper amount? And what was the consideration value? And when was the first payment supposed to be made? And what happens to the remaining amount? And who gets, and the agency, agent commission, etc. So we took all of that and we digitized it in the form of this agreement. Now, this agreement is a simple agreement for sale, but to actually legalize it, this needs to be generated on an e-stamp paper. We need to generate an e-stamp paper and append it to the agreement. So here's where you need to pay the stamp amount. If you remember, 20 rupees was the stamp amount, and we charge a small service fee of 4.99 until now, and we can pay it. This is live, mind you. So I'm just going to show you how I paid. Awesome. So I paid it offline. I used UPI payment and I paid it. So that's why you see payment has been successful. So now when I close this and refresh the page, you can see there's one document waiting for your signature, but something amazing has happened here already. Oh, not that. Let me download the document first. So the document that I showed you previously has now become a legal e-stamp document. You see, this document is now appended with a legal e-stamp document. We have gone all the way to the Stockholding Corporation of India and fetched a stamp paper. Okay, and the stamp paper is worth 20 rupees, with first party being as Pawan, the buyer, and the second party being Mohit, the seller. Okay, normally to get to this point, it could take 3 weeks in the real world. And we have shown you how we could do this within 20 minutes. Okay. All right, let's go back to the transaction. So the first action item that's being called out immediately as soon as the e-stamp has been generated is for a signature. Now, note that when I log in, I will be able to see here and click here and start signing, but I will also get an email or a notification saying that there is a document ready to sign. So let's go into this and I can show you how we can sign using Aadhaar based authentication, which is another amazing thing about our platform. All right, so let me sign. I'm going to enter my Aadhaar number and I'm going to ask to send the OTP. So the request has gone to NSDL and I should be getting an OTP real quick here. I got the OTP. And there we go. It's successful. So what does it mean? The document has been signed by the buyer. So when we take a look at the document and open it up and go to the very last page, you'll see that a signature has been applied. And this is authentic and this is an Aadhaar based signature and it's valid in the court of law, absolutely. Okay, there you go. You see that. Okay. All right. Now I'm going to quickly have the others sign the document as well. So I went offline for a few minutes and had the other stakeholders like the seller and the agent sign off on the agreement as well. Let's take a look at what's happened. So when I log in and go to the transaction and scroll all the way down, look at these green check marks. That means all the stakeholders have signed. Let's take a look at the agreement. And when you open the agreement and scroll all the way to the last page, you'll notice that there are now 4 signatures. The buyer, which was me, had signed a while ago, and then the seller as well as the agent, plus Realtimate has signed it because the escrow agreement is a tripartite agreement. Let's close this. Now, there's another amazing thing that's happened, which is the creation of a virtual escrow account for the transaction. So you can see the legends here, the blue indicating the advance amount of 20 lakhs, which needs to be made in the next 3 days because the agreement has just been signed. The remaining sale amount, which is the 80 lakhs, both combined is the 1 crore. And then the funds in the escrow, which is zero for now. And total funds needed would be the 1 crore. If you click on the account number here, you'll have the details for the virtual escrow account to which the money can be deposited, which will then be reflected here. Now let's show that real quick. Let's make some small transfer and show you how quickly it would be reflected. So I'm going to go to my Razorpay account, which will help me create a contact, and I'm going to create a contact to make the transfer. This is the virtual escrow account number. And ICC Bank's IFSC code. So the fund account has been successfully added. Let's transfer 20 rupees to test it. Let's call it escrow test transfer. All right. So it sent an OTP to my account. All right. So the payout has been created. That means the transfer must have happened. Let's see what has happened now. All right, do you see what just happened? We made the 20 rupees transfer to this escrow account, which was from the details of which was collected from here. And you see here that the amount has made it to the escrow. This is the beauty of our whole process and application, right? We we started from the offer, we went we made the transaction and we signed the agreement and we opened an escrow account and the deposit was made all within 20 minutes. It's real. It is possible. So with that, the second stage of the agreement for sale and escrow is now completed. And I will go on to the third stage just shortly. Now that the second stage is over, the third stage starts and it includes release of contingencies, registration of the property, and finally the disbursement of escrow funds. I should be able to show the release of contingencies and other features of our application at this stage, but since the property registration happens offline, I can only show you what happens after the registration and talk to how the funds will be released. So let me dive into the release of contingencies here. So I'm again logging in as the buyer. So if you remember, the time required by the buyer was about 21 days when he made the offer, right? So I deliberately took the recording offline and came back a couple of days later. So now you can see they have become 19 days because 2 days have passed, and I decided let's give 2 days for the recording, right? So 19 days. I mean, in the real world, it could take 2 weeks, 3 weeks, but will be within the time period. Now, there are a few options that the buyer can leverage, right? So he can come back and say, okay, I have heard from a lawyer and everything checks out, so legal verification contingency is clear. Or he could even come back and say, I've heard from my bank and my loan has been approved, the loan contingency is clear. Okay, so he would go ahead and click on the release contingency here. But I'll get to that just in a moment because we are going to release the contingency. But there are other things that he can do. Let's say the bank or the lawyer calls him back and says, it's going to take time. 21 days were never enough, so we need some more extended time to be able to complete the legal verification or due diligence or the loan approval. So he can come here and say, let's extend the contingencies. So he can say legal clearance, okay, or loan approval. So let's pick loan approval, right? You probably know this is October and there are a lot of holidays between Dasara and Diwali. So I can come back here and say, let's extend it by 14 more days. Too many holidays this month. Bank can't process the loan. Okay, and you can attach supporting documentation. And when I click generate, there will be a contingency extension agreement that will need to be signed by both the buyer and the seller. Okay, so it can't be just signed by the buyer. The seller will also need to sign off. At that point, this will change to 19 or whatever the timeline plus 14 days because that's what was requested. Okay, but I'm not going to do that because eventually I want to release the contingency. If I extend the contingency, then it won't let me release it until it's signed. So the other option is contingency failed. Let's say the lawyer calls back and says there's some real big issue with the property, so I wouldn't recommend moving ahead. So he could call back. He could open up the contingency failed option and he could say legal clearance, um, due diligence failed. And he could attach the supporting document provided by the lawyer report, and he could generate the agreement and sign off. So then a notification will be sent to the seller saying the contingency failed and the buyer is going to terminate the transaction. Okay, so those are the couple of other options. Now there are other cool options, right? Upload a document. Why is this required? So here's where you could ask the seller to upload documents like encumbrance certificate, khata certificate, old sale deed, mother's deed, and sign it off, right? So it's absolutely so that the buyer is absolutely sure that it was the seller who uploaded it, and he can request any number of documents from here. So the buyer or the seller could even extend the closing date. So for some reason, if there was an emergency within the either the buyer or the seller, they could come back and say, you know, we agreed for 30 days, but let's go ahead and extend it by another 14 days. And you can provide the reason and upload the supporting documents, if any, and request for it. And both the stakeholders will need to be signing off on that. Okay. Uh, then there is an create amendment, which is pretty cool, right? If due to market conditions, if there was a change in sale price, right, whether it increased or decreased, you could make an amendment to the existing agreement for sale by saying market conditions, okay? And you can upload the any supporting document, and you can say, let's say next, and instead of 1 crore, it's now 1.2 crores because maybe there was heavy demand for that property, okay? That's 12 lakhs, one point, and next, and then you can change the payment schedule, everything. You can do anything basically. I'm not going to go ahead, but you get the picture hopefully. And then it will generate an amendment and it will attach here, and both the stakeholders will need to sign off again. Now, let's say the buyer or seller is not responding for some reason, despite clearing the contingencies or being on top of things, then either the buyer or seller could issue a notice to perform. See, right now I cannot show you anything because there was nothing pending. So everything is happening within time and there are still 19 days left. I can't issue notice to perform, but let's say the buyer missed this deadline, okay, and it went past due. Then the seller could log in and say, issue notice to perform. Hey, Mr. Buyer, you are past due. Uh, I'm going to issue a notice to perform, and there's absolute proof, right? The buyer will get an email as well as a message saying the seller has issued a notice to perform. And then there's transaction terminator. So worst case, what could happen? A notice to perform is sent, and there's no response from the buyer for 3 days. So then the transaction could be terminated. And likewise, it works the other way as well. Buyer could also issue a notice to perform. The seller has not done anything, didn't turn up at registration, then he could terminate. And there are other reasons why it could happen, right? Force majeure acts of God. There's a flood. There's a volcano explosion, or there's COVID or some other thing. So both of them want to mutually call off the deal. They could sign off on a terminate transaction agreement. Okay, and there are other things that can be done. So service providers, right? You could add service providers like lawyers, brokers, property inspectors, land surveyors, etc., and even the head of a loan agent, I mean, a rental agent, sorry, not the rental agency, a broker agency, right? If the boss wants to monitor the transaction, so you could add all of them. So you could simply say, let's say in this case, a lawyer, please verify my documents, and then you can go here and in this case, we do have a lawyer. So this is lawyer one. I'm going to simply add the service provider. So now the lawyer is invited because this lawyer was already in our system. We could add this lawyer and he or she has access to all the documents here. Okay, so they can see the agreement for sale. They could see if the seller had uploaded old sale deed, mother's deed, or Kata certificate, etc. They have access to everything, or they could even request for new documents. They don't have to send a boy to fetch the document from the buyer's home or the seller's home, and everything can be done online. They could just download it and print it or review it digitally as well. So we really want to get to a place where we can create a marketplace eventually of all the service providers where based on ratings the buyers could select based on ratings, and based on specific location they could select the service providers and they could add them to the transaction. We want to really make it seamless. So now that you know all the kinds of possibility, let's do the most simple thing here to release the contingency. Now let's say I'm going to release the legal clearance contingency. Everything is good. So then I'm not going to attach a supporting document, but I feel comfortable that my lawyer is good at it. So I'm going to say agreement generated successfully. So now what has happened is a contingency release agreement which has been generated, and it's just like how I signed the agreement for sale. I would need to do the same thing by signing the contingency release document. So same thing would happen. I would get a prompt to fill in my Aadhaar card, and I will be able to sign it. Normally the OTP takes a few seconds to arrive. It depends on the NSDL. Okay, so it is here. All right, so document is signed. Now let's see what happened here. If I open this document, it will say that removal of contingency. And what kind of contingency? It was a legal clearance contingency. And the signature here, as you can see, my signature here. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to go offline real quick and also clear the loan approval contingency so that I don't have to record that as well here. And I'll come back in just a bit. So I went offline for a few minutes, and I managed to clear the other contingency, the loan contingency as well. Let's see what has happened now. When I log in and check out the transaction, now it's become non-contingent. It's moved to a non-contingent status. What it means is that the property is ready for registration, or the process itself is ready for registration. And there are a few things that need to happen, right, for registration: paying the stamp duty, paying the TDS, paying the balance of 80 lakhs or 80% to the sellers, and the paying of stamp duty or paying of TDS. In most cases, your lawyers or your agents will be able to help you, as in help the buyers. But if you don't want to take their help, or if you wanted to take our help, we can connect you to some of our trusted service advisors who will be able to take care of this for you. And likewise, the next step would be the property registration, right? And we have people who work with us to set up a registration appointment at the registrar office and make the process as seamless as it can be, right? See, the idea is for us to enable you to do everything remotely except the property registration, which is, of course, mandatory to be signed in person in front of the registrar office. So now, since both the contingencies have been cleared, as you can see through the check marks, the one thing that needs to be done is the releasing of the escrow funds, right? So let's assume that the property registration has happened. All these activities have happened offline, okay? And you prepared for registration, you paid the stamp duty, you paid TDS, registration fees, etc. And then the next thing is your property registration happened, and you also ended up paying the remaining balance to the to the seller. So what you would do then is come and release the sign the escrow release letter. So we ask a few things, right? What is the date of the registration? And then what was the specific registration office? And then remarks, anything. You could say completed registration, completed. Okay, and then we ask for supporting documents of proof. In most cases it will be a encumbrance certificate, and the buyer would generate a escrow release letter. Now if you look at the escrow release letter, there are two people that need to be signing. And what I'll do is I will go offline and I will sign it as on behalf of the buyer as well as the seller, so that I don't bore you on this video about the signing again. I'll be back in just a bit. All right, I'm back, and I went offline and had both the buyer and seller sign off on the escrow release agreement. So let's take a quick look at how this escrow agreement looks. So it's a letter authorizing Realtimate to release the money in the escrow to the seller account. When we collected the seller details, when he created the profile, we also had him submit his bank account details as well. So we know where to put the money into. And because both the buyer and seller have acknowledged that the property registration has happened, and now they are ready to take the transfer, which I mean the seller is ready to take all the money, we can release the funds. But we have an additional level of security. We are working closely with Universal Trustees. They're a real good trusteeship firm, and this is mandated by RBI as well as ICICI for operators of escrow, right? So what we do, we will send all the details of the transaction, like agreement for sale, the escrow release letter, the disbursement matrix, etc., and we will ask Universal to verify and validate if what we are doing is correct and if the amount that needs to be transferred is the right amount. So what will happen is Universal trustees will take the documents, will review the documents, will review the amount in the escrow, etc., and then they will give us a thumbs up saying you're authorized to transfer. At that point, we will disperse the money in the escrow account to the seller. Okay, right now there's only a 20 rupees, but in a real life scenario, what we expect is the buyer will at least get the advance amount, and any kind of difference between the loan and the advance amount will also be brought through the escrow and be dispersed through the escrow to the seller after the property registration. So that's the whole process. So friends, that was the end of the demo. You just witnessed a highly sophisticated tool that can dramatically change how real estate transactions can be done in India. We went from an offer to an agreement for sale to e-stamping to digital Aadhaar signature to opening an escrow account and finally to depositing the money, all completed in less than 30 minutes. And I also showed you the various actions and possibilities on the tool. Hope you guys like the demo. You can reach out to us on service@realtimate.in or simply send us a message by filling the details here and submitting. So we hope to hear from you soon. Have a great day. Take care. Bye.